My name is Charles Michael James. I was named after my great-grandfather, Carlo Michele Tedesco. So my family is Italian, and I was born December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, 1947, in Long Beach, California. We lived in a little town called Wilmington, which was right next door. And but it was a very poor town and didn't have any kind of hospital. But Long Beach next door did, and so that's where I was born. And I was born to my mother, Jeanette Henrietta Tedesco, and my father, Kenneth Dale James. My mother is full-blooded Italian. My father is English and Welsh. My father left when I was 6 months old, and I guess they were young. They married just right out of high school, and he left, and I never saw him again until I was 38. And it's kind of a cool story. I was painting on this scaffold down in Temple Square. I was 38 years old, had 5 kids, and my painter that was painting next to me, we were just talking, killing time, and he says, "What about your natural father?" And he says, I said, "I don't know anything about him. My family hates him and says he's a bum." And so he got really offended, and he says, because he had been denied custody of his only child. And he says, "How do you know he's a bum?" He says, "I bet you there isn't a day go by he doesn't think about you." And so I thought about that, you know. Here I am, 38, I've never seen my father. I thought, I want to see him. I'd be happy with a phone call, you know. And so I was painting this guy's house, who was a private detective. And I asked him, "Do you think you could find my natural father?" And he says, "Piece of cake." And so the next day he had everything. I had tried for 2 years to try to find him. And he was a hermit. And I was unable to locate him. But then he found him the next day. He gave me all of his information. So I called him on the phone and I asked him, "Is this Kenneth Dale James?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, and I'm your son, Chuck." And it turns out he had paid child support on me religiously for 18 years. My mom never told me that part. And turns out he was a really nice guy. And we had 10 years together, and it was wonderful. And we made several trips. He came up to my house in Park City and brought his kids, and we had lots of good times together. And he had 3 daughters, but never any other sons. And so it was a good situation. Anyway, the last thing he said to me before he died was, "There wasn't a day go by that I didn't think about you." So it was a good deal. Anyway, I lived in Wilmington pretty much all my life until I was 21. And my mother remarried when I was about 4.5 or 5, and I was raised pretty much by my stepfather. And my stepfather was, he was a good man. He was a go-getter and type A personality, and became a realtor, and came from a really poor family, but really worked hard, became wealthy. Not wealthy, but sort of well-to-do, middle class. Anyway, my parents divorced when I was about, my stepfather and my mother divorced when I was about 12 or 13. We moved all over. I had moved 14 times by the time I was 14. So I was all over the place. And life was good. I was a good student. I was on the honor roll all the time, got straight A's. But I didn't have much supervision. My parents really didn't know how to raise kids. And I didn't have much supervision. I always got into trouble. By the time I was 12, I was a convicted felon. And I didn't even know you could be a convicted felon when you're 12, but I was. I still am, probably. But I don't know. I managed to get really, my stepfather always preached to me about going to college. It wasn't where I was going to college. I mean, it wasn't when or if, it was where I was going to college. And I knew I had to go to college. And he preached this constantly. And so I tried several schools in California. This was during the 60s, which was a very tumultuous time. And it was really hard to get a decent education because there was so much sex, drugs, and rock and roll and craziness everywhere. And I was right in the middle of it all and doing all the wrong things with all the wrong people. And I knew that I was going to end up dead or in jail unless I got out of town. So my mom was going with this Mormon guy. His name was Blaine Cartwright. He was a pharmacist, and he was trained at BYU. And he says, you should go to BYU. I go, BYU? That's a Mormon school. I don't want to go there. He goes, you should go there. He says, all you got to do is wear pants and they'll let you in. There's 2 girls to every guy, and you can get in really easily. And I had reasonably good grades. And he says you can ski. I had just learned how to ski. And he says you can ski your brains out, and everybody's really friendly, and you'll get a really good education. So I threw my skis in the back of my '53 Volkswagen, headed for Utah. So here I walk into the administration building at BYU, and I've got an afro out to here, a Grateful Dead t-shirt, bell-bottom pants, and I walk in, and that poor lady just about fell out of her chair. She says, are you lost? I go, no, I'm going to go to BYU. She said, do you have a place to live? I go, no. She goes, well, why don't you go over to the Riviera Apartments? You can stay with my son, who's over there in the Riviera Apartments. So I walk into the Riviera Apartments, I sign up, and I move in with 5 returned missionaries. And they think I'm from Pluto. You know, I mean, I am just so different from everybody there. But I was willing to go along with it, you know, everything. The people were so friendly. The first day, you know, they take me to Temple Square and explain the whole thing to me and everything. And so anyway, I was one of the few people baptized in the Provo River in 1969, in the middle of winter. Well, I was baptized in the Provo River. And so that was the beginning of my life as a Mormon. But anyway, I came here and I was painting pretty much. I knew that after BYU, I couldn't find a decent job, but I knew I could paint because I had painted my whole life for my family. They had income property, and so I was always the cheapest painter in town. I had my own painting business when I was 14, and so I painted all the way through school and all the way through university, and graduated BYU, and decided that I was just going to take it easy for a while. I was going to be a doctor, and then I decided, nah, I don't want to be a doctor. And so I went to Park City. I taught there while I was at BYU. I was on the first ski school at Park City West, and I skied there quite a bit. And then when I graduated BYU, I decided I was just going to ski for at least 1 year. And so I skied. I remember skiing every skiable day of that season, and it was a good season. And so I was skiing there, and then I would love to dance. I didn't like drinking or anything, but I loved to dance, and there was only one place in town that was really rocking cowboy bar. It was a rip-snorting cowboy bar. You could hear it a mile away. And I walked in there, and I see this girl up on the stage dancing. Her blonde hair was just blowing all over the place. And I sat down in the only available chair, and it turned out this was her chair. She was the queen of the Crazy Horse Saloon, and that was her chair. She had her own throne, and and so I took her chair, and she mercilessly evicted me from my chair. And so I thought, wow, I wanted to dance with her, so we danced, and one thing led to another, and next thing we know, we got married. We got married in California, close to her home. She was from Orange County, and I was from LA County, and we got along really good. And next thing you know, we were married and had 6 kids, and now we have 12 grandkids. And so I became a painter, and I had been painting in California my whole youth. So I was a good painter. And so when I went to BYU, and everybody, this is 1968, the minimum wage was $1.15 an hour. And that's what everybody made in town. But I was a painter, and I had skills. And so I went to work for a painting contractor at $3.50. And so I felt really good about that. And that got me through school and through everything. And so when I graduated, I went up to Park City, and and I met my wife, and we got married, and I decided I would just keep painting because there was really no decent jobs, but at least in teaching or whatever. I graduated in zoology, and zoology pre-med. It was a pre-med course, and I graduated in zoo, and so we first we decided that we would live in Park City, and we had a little trailer out at it was called Hidden Haven Campground. We had a little trailer out there, and I taught skiing, and 9 months and 3 days after we were married, my wife had a baby, and and that was our first child. And we had 6 kids total, but I taught skiing, and life was good, and my wife taught skiing, and life was really good. And at that time, they really needed a painter in Park City. There was really no good painters in Park City, and I was able to. They were paying me $10.50 an hour when everybody else was making $3, and so I felt really good about that. And before long, we were doing really well, and we bought our own house there in Summit Park. That's close to Jeremy Ranch. Right there, we bought our own house, and I had a crew of painters, and we were making really good money. I built another house just out of my checkbook because I was making so much money. You could build a house out of your checkbook, a big house, and it was really good. Life was good, and so just I was basically a house painter back then. I was artistic, but I didn't really use it much. And then I decided I wanted to learn the finer aspects of painting and decorating. And so I was working for a contractor down in Salt Lake, and he says, there's a big job coming up, the Assembly Hall on Temple Square, and it's going to require all kinds of really special effects, wood graining and marbleizing and all kinds of, special stenciling and gold leafing and everything. And he says, why don't you do it? I said, I don't know how to do all that fancy stuff. He says, go find those German guys, those old Europeans. They know how to do it. And there was only a few of them left. These guys were winding up their work and retiring, and there wasn't many left, but I found a couple of them, and they agreed to help me with this job, and it went really slick. And we made good money, and I learned how to do a lot of special skills. And then fast forward quite a few years, I get a call from a friend of mine who's working on this home, and this home at 5 East. Okay, it turns out the Hardy Foundation, they're a foundation up in Idaho, had bought several of these homes that were built by John Watkins. John Watkins is the great-great-grandfather of Kay Caslow, who is one of the regents of the Hardy Foundation. And so they asked me to do some special effects on this house because that's what was done originally. And so that's how I got involved in this particular part of Midway. Okay, I had done a few jobs in Midway, but never really much. And this was probably at least 20 years ago. They called me to do this special work here. So now we need to talk a little bit about the history of John Watkins.
How did they know you were specialized?
Because the brick mason on this house, it's a company called Abstract Masonry Restoration. They are world famous, and they go all over the world doing the restoration of masonry like no one else. And this was one of my scouts was the owner of this company. He's the one that started it, one of my Boy Scouts. And so he knew me, and he knew that I did this kind of work, and so he recommended, and they called me, and I said, fine. And that was the beginning of a great relationship between me and the Hardy Foundation. And so let's go back now to early 1800s when John Watkins was in England, and he was a very skilled architect who had done work all over England for the Crown, for a lot of special people. He was very knowledgeable in architecture, and he was converted to the church, and then later then got married to his first wife, Margaret, and then they came over on the boat to Boston, made their way to Iowa, and then joined the Martin Handcart Company. And if you know anything about the Mormon pioneers, that was the ill-fated handcart company. They had serious problems, and the hardships that these people went through is unbelievable. And anyway, they somehow made it across the plains and got to Salt Lake, and he was one of the pioneers of Provo and was an architect that worked on the Provo Tabernacle and did a lot of work there, and then decided to come up to the Upper Provo area, which was what they called this area, Upper Provo, and he took on 2 more wives at that point in time. And so they moved up here, and at first they had to live in the fort. There was a fort, and the fort was midway between south and north, so they called it Midway. And it was Fort Midway, and they lived in the fort for a while, the 3 wives and all their kids. And then finally, when the Indians weren't bothering them, they decided to build a house. And the house was, they call it the shelter house because it was built very quickly and just to give them shelter. And it's sitting, we're restoring it right now as we speak. And it has 3 rooms with 3 fireplaces, 3 entrances, 3 exits, and for 3 wives. And so each wife had their own room and could cook, and live independently of the other 2 wives. And so while they were building this home that I live in presently, they were living in the shelter house. And as soon as they got this home took, I think, almost 2 years to build. But think about this one here that we're living in. This is the house at 5 East. This was considered a mansion by pioneer standards. There was nothing else in town. There was a few shacks and a few log homes and stuff, but there was nothing like this. And to think that he would spend the time to make this home and go through, you know, as you look at the outside and you see all the hand-carved barge boards, which were carved out of one piece of log. And it took weeks to do this. And to spend that kind of time on the intricacy of this Gothic revival type of architecture that he knew in England. This is not a Swiss thing. This is an English thing. And he was trained in Gothic revival architecture, and so he built his home, his mansion, by that type of architecture. And he went to you know, great pains to make it really nice. And so it had served very well for him and his three. The first wife decided she wanted her own home, so she stayed over in the shelter house a block away. That was Margaret. She wanted her own place, and so the other two wives came over here. So he kind of bounced between the two homes. Well, this worked out great, and then John Watkins was the bishop of the ward here for 17 years. And this home worked out very well. They added on to it 3 times. And then in, I think, right around the turn of the century, John Watkins passed away at 62. He was 62 years old. And the house was then sold to the Coleman family. And they had the home for 80 years or so. And this home, Lethe Tadgey was a Coleman, and she moved into this house when she was about 9 years old, and she stayed here until she was 90 something. For over 80 years she lived in this house. And when we got the house, when we were asked to work on it, it was in shambles. And they had just restored the outer brick, and that took years to do. It took me 7 years to restore this house, off and on. For 7 years I worked on it. The plaster was falling off the walls. The woodwork had been destroyed by 150 years of use. You know, I don't think it's abuse. It's just people lived here, and you know, it just had really taken its toll. And so we were given the job of restoring it for the Hardy Foundation. And they basically just gave me carte blanche, said, make it pretty and make it historically accurate. And there was not a lot of involvement from the owners. You know, they came and checked every now and again, but I made most of the decisions to, you know, to what to do. They made some of the major decisions, but I did all the day-to-day stuff, and hiring contractors and getting an electrician and redoing the floors and, you know, just everything. And it was a fun job, and the accuracy, the historical accuracy, had to be maintained all the way through. I mean, for example, he would not want us to use screws because there were no screws back in those days. So there were nails. I mean, like for the floor, we used, you know, the cut nails, the hand-cut nails. We had to locate them. The light fixtures had to be completely restored and find all the appropriate glass. And so, you know, it was a labor of love, and it was really interesting. We found a small piece of wood graining. That was the original wood graining from back in 1868. And so we matched all of the wood graining that you see in the house was all matched to that color. The moldings that you see all had to be, we found some of the original moldings and we had the mill match the molding profile perfectly so that it was all original. It was a lot of fun to do, and I think it came out really, really well. What we did is we went down through all the layers of paint to find the original paint that this was painted in when John Watkins built the home. And this was what it looked like, the original marble that was painted to look like marble. This is just wood, but it was all painted to look like marble, and this is the original colors that we did. The wood grain that you see here is all been painted to look like oak, but it's actually just pine that came right out of the forest. And that's what they did back then to simulate hardwood rather than softwood. And the same thing on the doors. You see here, these doors were all painted to look like oak. This is a quarter sawn oak pattern, and this is just drawn to look like hardwood.
Explain the process that you have to do for it.
It's very time consuming. There's 7 layers that go involved in order to get it like this. We actually have to use different paints, and we have to let them dry overnight, and 7 times to get it just like that. 7 layers of paint. All the hardware that you see, this is the original hardware, or new hardware that made to look, the exact hardware that was reproduced. You can still buy this stuff. It's been remanufactured, but this is the exact hardware that John Watkins had when he built the house. I don't know where they got it. They must have got it from back east somewhere, So this is the original stairway built by John Watkins, also wood grained to look like mahogany wood here and oak everywhere else. It's very steep, but solid as the Rock of Gibraltar. Really well made, and we still use it, but you have to be careful because it's very steep. So these are the coins. They call these coins on the corners, and these are a combination of pot rock and limestone, two different stones. All the brick was restored, the paint was removed off, and several hundreds of brick had to be replaced because they were just so well damaged. But it came out really nice. The barge boards that you see up there, I don't know why they call them that, but that's the name given to those curlicue boards that you see up there. And those were cut out of one piece of log. And the reason I know this is because I have one of the logs they didn't cut. I still have it in the barn. And they would cut this without power tools, with chisels, hand drills, and planes. And it took weeks for them to actually carve those boards. And so they were really happy, and the Hardy Foundation bought some 10 homes that John Watkins had built in this town, and bought them all. And we have restored several of them, and they're still restoring them, and they'll probably restore the rest before too long. But just about every house that John Watkins built has been restored or is in the process of being restored. And so we've enjoyed working for them. And then we had a home up in Eden, and we had a bed and breakfast up there, a big bed and breakfast, a home that we also restored. And we decided we wanted to sell it because it was a lot of work. And so we sold it. We really didn't have a place to live, and they offered us to stay here. And because they knew that I could take care of this place, and they trusted me with it, because this is kind of their crown jewel, you know, this house here. And so we take excellent care of it, and you know, fix things that need fixing, or touch up, painting, or whatever needs to be done. But we have a home in St. George as well, so we come up here usually winter and summer, and we go to our St. George home fall and spring. And so it works out really nice. We love coming up here in the winter and skiing, and we love coming up here in the summer when it's nice and cool and it's super hot in St. George. And so that's kind of the program. Right now we're involved in the restoration of the shelter house, and that house is turning out to be quite a project. It's amazing. It's only about probably, I don't know, 900 square feet at the very most, 3 rooms, but getting it all back to the way it was. We had to strip off all of the plaster, all inside and out, because they had during the 40s they plastered over everything, and it originally was pot rock walls and a brick face on the front of it. But we're getting it back to the way it was when it was originally built, and it's coming along really nicely. My son Thad is the one that's taking care of that job, and I'm trying to retire, but I'm having a lot of difficulty because my clients don't seem to be too interested in my retirement plans. But life is good, and we
Tell a little of the unique stuff that you found working at that shelter house. You know that there's, when I went to look at it, there was like just a whole, you'd taken everything out, the beams.
John Watkins was such a skilled architect, but there were 2 things that he could not do, and that was the wood graining and the barge boards, the carving of the barge boards, the curlicue boards and stuff like that. But on the shelter house, he was able to do just about everything, and he was the first one to make a factory for bricks. Here, these homes were the first brick homes in Wasatch County, and he was the one that he was instrumental in getting a lime kiln going, and they had a factory to make the bricks, and so most of the homes that he built in the area are made of brick that he did. And as I said, the beams over there at the shelter house were scavenged from the fort, and they took them, you know, the fort was coming down, so they took the beams from the fort and they put them into and all the big giant beams that form the roof of the shelter house are all from the beams that were in the fort. And apparently everything worked out pretty good for them, the 3 families, you know, for a while they were building this house. It worked out pretty well for them. We found lots of old bottles and tools and all kinds of things in the ground around it, old stuff. And they didn't use cement back then. They didn't have cement. They had lime mortar, which is softer, and that's what they used to put together all the rock and make these walls. And so the owner would not let them use current mortar. We had to find the proper mortar for all the rocks and for the bricks and everything. And the bricks were extremely damaged when they took off the plaster. And so they had to find the exact brick that matched the old-fashioned brick and find the exact mortar that matched the old mortar. I mean, everything has to be done, you know, historically accurate. Another thing
There's a company that makes that brick?
they found one. Yeah, they found one. And another thing that I was going to mention, wallpaper. Even back then, the early, like around 1900, they had wallpaper, and this house had 13 layers of wallpaper on the walls, and they asked me to take them off. I had to cut holes in the plaster, soak it for days, gently peel off all the layers of wallpaper, categorize them chronologically in a book. And so I made this book that's this thick, and it has every room, the wallpapers that were in each room, all the layers, all in chronological order. And what was interesting was this book, after I got it done, I mean, it was irreplaceable. I mean, it was just what they wanted. It took me, I don't know how long to make this book with all the wallpapers in it. And so then Gregory says, just put it in some safe place. So I thought, okay, I'll put it in a safe. So I hid it in a safe place. And then fast forward 5 years, I forgot where I had hid it. And I didn't know. And he asked me for the book. He wanted the book. And I said, it's around, hold on, I'll find it. And I looked everywhere for that book, and I couldn't find it. And then in a dream, I remembered where I put the book. And it was down in the basement behind a bunch of stuff. And it was in a dream that I found the exact place where I put that book. It was crazy. But
talk about the animal boxes that you found.
Oh,
that was
yeah.
an addition?
yes.
Obviously.
Yeah, in the 40s, it was I think 1940. This was war years, you know. And we hadn't entered the war yet, but, well, maybe it was. It was right when we entered the war. I'm not sure exactly what year. That would have been about, let's see, 41. Yes, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Yeah, so it was like 42 or right in there. They wanted to do an addition on the back of the house. And so they built this, and there were no 2x4s, so they made it all out of ammo boxes. Turns out several homes in Midway are made out of ammo boxes. And these ammo boxes are only about this long and square, and it says right on the box, ammunition, high explosives, and what kind of caliber they are and stuff like that. It was really cool. Anyway, they made the addition out of the ammo boxes and did a wonderful job of it and making really strong walls out of these ammo boxes. But they're still there, and we're going to make it so that it's visible, so that the people that, you know, are in the house can see these ammo boxes. So we built an extra wall outside to support the, and then we don't have anything on the ammo boxes, so they're visible. But it's really kind of cool. The trees that you see out in front are well over 150 years old. I think John Watkins went up in the forest and got seedlings of these big fir trees, and he planted them out in front, and they're the biggest trees in town. Unfortunately, they're starting to die, and we might have to plant new ones, but I have pictures of this home without any trees and without anything around. Nothing. I mean, it's like a prairie. You know, there's just nothing around, and there's this mansion right in the middle of town, you know. It just seemed so funny that they would spend all this time for this mansion, you know. But
how do you think he had that money to, I mean, it still would have taken a lot of money.
Everything,
this.
everything that this home was made of was locally found. They didn't, later on, they may have got stuff from back east and stuff, you know, fixtures, stuff, I don't know. But originally, everything was pine, came right out of the forest. Mm-hmm. All the pot rock came right out of the ground. All the brick came out of the minerals that they found. Everything came from right here locally, because, even going to Salt Lake was, that take a couple days. They only could travel 25 miles a day. Back then, they didn't have cars, they didn't have electricity, nothing. And there was, of course, an outhouse, which is still out there. You can still see the outhouse. And so when we moved here from Midway, we had 5 bathrooms in that house in Midway. We moved here, we have 1. And my wife gets that, and I get the outhouse. So
I don't believe that. Excellent. And then we can add some pictures, if we can add your pictures as we go along.
Yeah.
So any interesting stories from the Coleman side? Have you heard any
Yes,
interesting Coleman
yes.
stories?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Lethe Tadji was, like I say, she moved in with the Coleman family. She was a Coleman when she was 9 years old. They took over the house when John Watkins died. Well, she lived here pretty much all of her life, but she became kind of world-renowned actress. She was, at least she traveled a lot, and she would come back and do, shows of all the places that she had been, and she was a very popular person here in town. She did marry, and for part of her life, but she was like a real fixture in this town, and she was really friends with all the kids. All the kids loved to come by her house, and she had candy for them, and she would shake their hand and say, "You just shook the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand of Joseph Smith." That's what she would do. And she would make movies, some of which are still available on YouTube. You can go and watch The Mailbox and several other movies. And she was quite the lady, and very well loved. And she lived in this house for 80 years, and so everybody refers to this house as Lethe's house, and they don't know that John Watkins was the one who actually built it, and lived here for 30 years or so.
She was on, you can cut this out, but she was on the Chautauqua circuit way back when that was the way that they spread entertainment and news and political stuff.
Yes, I read that this morning.
Yeah,
yes, that was.
I'd love to include maybe a link to that when we do Lethe, because I think it was such an incredible Chautauqua.
Yeah. A lot of the people, her family, or friends, like the Bonner family, used to help her. Chop her firewood, bring in coal, help her, because she was getting up in years. And a lot of people in town would come by and offer assistance to her. When we got here, there was a old-fashioned wood coal stove over here, and that lady must have been very special. Life was hard back then. They didn't even have a working bathroom until 1930. So most of her life she was going out to the outhouse.
I did a preschool. You can cut this out too, but I did a preschool, and this was one of our field trips. We'd walk over from the old Midway school, over. Every year she would, invite us in, have tea and cookies or something.
Yeah.
The preschool kids had to write in her guest book all their names.
Yes, she had a guest book, and everybody had to write their name in it. Yes, this is all long before I ever came to this town, but we get all the information from some of the local. Oh, and another thing, it's unsubstantiated, but rumor has it that John Watkins, when he was living here, he was being hunted by the federal authorities for polygamy, and he had a secret escape route under the stairs. they dug down and they went in. Over here, there's catacombs under the ground. And if you put a pole down, there's nothing down there. There's all these catacombs and stuff. And he would, rumor has it, that he would go out the stairs, down under the stairs, and then out through the catacombs, and then over to the other building over there. Somehow they had an escape route for him. But that is just conjecture. It hasn't been, verified, but that's what I've heard anyway. And I don't know, this house has a lot. Oh, and my kids swear that there's a ghost upstairs. They've stayed in the upstairs and they swear there's a ghost up there, but I don't know.
Any unique materials that he used? I know you showed us this, the roof thing. The roof. Reremember when we went up there and you showed us, and it was like these big planks of wood that they used.
Yes. And I still haven't figured out how he powered this saw, but the saw is still out there that he made this house with. And the blade is this big around. It's a metal blade and it's that big around. And the saw is there and it's belt driven somehow. And I can't figure out if it was mule driven or water driven or somehow. But somehow he rigged up this saw to cut all the logs for this house. And they're hand hewn. And you can tell because some of the planks are this wide up there that covered the roof. And you can still see them. Yeah, it's a very unique home. And everything from this wall right here over has been added. The original house only came to that wall. And you can tell because the wall is very thick. That door there that goes into the parlor is an outside wall. And this was an outside window, you can tell right there, So.
Do you know this? Talk a little bit about the way they laid bricks. Double bricked it, right?
Yes, yeah, everything was double. I guess that was the way that they built these homes. Yeah, the walls are super thick, and you can tell because once this home gets warm, it stays warm, and the same thing in the summer. We hardly need any air conditioning. We rarely turn it on because the home stays so cool because the walls are so thick, And the windows are all been replaced, but they're exactly the same kind of window that was made originally. And these doors, you think about it, how do they make these doors? That's an original door. How do they make those doors without any power tools? Nothing, all they have is planes, hand drills, chisels, and look at that door. There's not a flaw in it.
Doesn't work. So Chuck, anything you'd like to add about the uniqueness of our town of Midway and the value of preserving our town's historic buildings and the rural atmosphere? Anything that, you're living in it. How do you feel about that in Midway?
Oh, we feel like rock stars. Yeah. Just everybody loves this home. We've had 100 people probably by now come up to our door and say, yes, this is my great grandfather's home. We're from the Watkins family, and they have reunions, and I will talk to them. We'll have it out here on the grass, and they'll have 50 people, and we'll talk about the history of this home and stuff like that. But I am just so glad, not to mention the fact that I got a lot of work from it, but even not counting that, just so glad that someone has taken an interest in these properties and not just knocked them down. I realize there are times when you have to knock it down, but these were priceless, and especially this home. And to spend, a lot of money and time and effort to restore these homes and to restore them accurately, you know. I mean, for example, I gave you this example before. You know, I had worked for months on the wood graining, getting it all done perfectly, and when the owner came in, he says, "I don't like it." He says, "I want you to make it look old. I don't want it to look brand new. It looks brand new. I want it to look old." And so I had to go and, you know, distress it and shade it and make it perfect so it looked old. You know, that kind of, nobody does that, you know? I mean, and to pay for it, you know? So it's nice that somebody has taken an interest into these homes and wanted to restore them, because they're priceless. You know, you can't build a home like this nowadays, you know? And if you did, it would cost a bundle and it wouldn't be original, you know? So.
This side note, but remember, I was just walking up here and I thought, now why, you know why it was built? I mean, it's almost like it would have had a lake in front of there. I mean,
Oh, in the front
it's
yard?
landscaped
It
there.
was.
It was a lake?
It was they filled it up with water and had an ice skating rink there. Yeah.
That's great.
And I think originally that was a kind of a driveway. Originally it was a driveway
Like
with
for the wagons.
For the wagons and stuff. Yeah. The landscaping, you know, even to this day we irrigate. We have no sprinkling systems at all. We still irrigate, and that's the way they did it. And originally, of course, there were no cars or anything, so the wagons had to pull up in front, and it was kind of a U-shaped driveway. Yeah, they would flood it, and we still do.
No, I mean flood it for the ice skating.
Yeah, I mean when we irrigate, that's a lake. That all fills up with water. Yeah.